Support for this show comes from Lead Quizzes. Lead Quizzes helps you easily set up high-converting quizzes to capture and qualify leads for your business. Visit leadquizzes.com/podcast to get a 14-day free trial today.
I think a lot of people are like, oh, I want to get up to $1 million, but I only want to work 20 hours a week. I don't want to do heavy sales. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. And that's totally fine to be like, these are my constraints because of my lifestyle or whatever it ends up being. But I think for us, it was more like, we need to get there because we're trying to get to 10 and then we're trying to get to 100 and so on and so forth. And so all of a sudden it was like, cool. Like I paid myself $0 for the first 9 months, basically lived on cashed in my very small 401k. Because I wasn't old. I didn't have a big 401k and I took a tax hit. And then I paid myself $36,000 a year, which is basically well below the poverty line here in Boston. I did that for a while. And it was just because of these constraints, because I was like, oh, there's this bigger mission. There's the bigger vision of what we're trying to do.
From Lead Quizzes, it's Journey to 7 Figures, a show about entrepreneurs and the stories behind how they grew their business to 7 figures and beyond. We cover the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the lessons they learned along the way. So welcome back to Journey to 7 Figures. Today I'm interviewing Patrick Campbell, co-founder and CEO of ProfitWell, formerly known as Price Intelligently, the software for helping subscription companies with their monetization and retention strategies. ProfitWell also provides free turnkey subscription financial metrics for over 8,000 companies. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, pumped to be here. Pumped to chat with a fellow Midwesterner as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm excited to talk to you. You guys are doing over $10 million in revenue, but let's take it back to the beginning. How did you get the idea for Price Intelligently, and tell us a little bit about what it does?
Yeah, at the outset, I don't know if it was a brilliant idea moment or anything like that. I think for me, I was just at a really interesting point in my career where basically I was wanting to try out something on my own. I had worked at big tech and I worked at Google. I worked for the government and the intelligence community. Then I worked at a company called Gemvara, which is a startup that had raised about $30 million and were doing pretty well. But I'd worked on pricing there and I wasn't really enamored with the culture. And so it's one of those things where I was like, oh, well, this pricing thing, not everyone knows what they're doing. Most people don't know what they're doing. And it's a huge impact on your business. And so all of a sudden it was like putting 2 and 2 together along with my personal wanting to jump in and try something on my own. And so kind of jumped out and started a little MVP software product that was basically a survey tool connected to these algorithms that were developed. And essentially, kind of started grinding from there.
Awesome. So you talk about the problem that you're helping people solve is pricing and retention, but let's talk first a little bit about pricing. I think although you may have a lot of software companies, I think this conversation will be interesting to companies that are listening that, you have different pricing and maybe you think it's the right pricing, but it actually isn't. So Patrick, can you explain a little bit more of the problem that you first set out to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing is, and it doesn't really matter what business you're in, if you're agencies, if you're a content marketer, if you're, software enterprise, it doesn't really matter what you are. The thing that's kind of amazing about the world of technology and the world of online is that a lot of us will produce something of value. We'll write an ebook, we'll build an enterprise piece of software, we'll build a car, we'll build something. And then all of a sudden, when it comes time to price that product, we just lose our minds. Not lose our minds in the scary sense, but just lose our minds in the sense of I don't know, $50. I guess $50 makes sense. I guess $100 makes sense. Or you get into a room, you argue with, maybe your partners or whatever, and then you finally put something out there and then that price is the price for the next 5 years, basically. And so the biggest problem is getting people to realize that your price is the exchange rate on the value that you're providing. So when you're providing value to someone with an ebook, or you're providing value to someone with an enterprise piece of software or a subscription box or whatever you're doing, that value is crucial to measure for the customer that you're trying to sell to. Because if I'm selling an ebook to, someone who already knows what I'm talking about or writing about, then that's not going to have any value, right? But if I'm writing it to someone who has never heard of content marketing and it's content marketing 101, that might be super valuable, right? And so that was really the big problem that we were trying to solve, which was, how do you actually measure value so that we can stop putting all this effort into something and then not getting what we're worth, or not understanding what we're actually worth before we even put the effort into it?
Okay, so that's a huge problem. I'm sure everybody can relate with it on here. For most people, I know starting my business is, you think it's hard to come up with a scientific price. Maybe you just kind of test it out and see what the market says. But you saw this problem, Patrick. So how did you first go about solving it and helping people get closer to the accurate price that they should be charging?
Yeah, I think it kind of started with how do you actually like measure value or willingness to pay, right? And there's some really, really expensive ways you can do this. And there's some really, really cheap ways you can do this. And you get what you kind of pay for, right? So if you do a really, really expensive study where you collect a bunch of data and you look at the market and do all of this other fun stuff, you can get a really, really accurate number, right? You can figure out, oh, it's $49.99 for whatever you're trying to sell. Similarly, you can do a very like qualitative, like I can ask a couple of my buddies and say, hey, I'm trying to sell this. What do you think it's worth? And maybe I get, somewhere between $30 and $75, right? I think that what's interesting though is that what we started out doing was trying to bring, like what you kind of alluded to, a little bit more science, a little bit more rigor to this process, but finding an efficient way where you didn't have to spend a ton of money, but you also weren't, doing basically the bare minimum. And so what we initially did is we developed these algorithms that measured willingness to pay as well as what's called relative preference. So if you think of pricing or you think of like a traditional pricing page, you have two axes. You have the actual price, that's like the y axis, if you will, the up and down for the different tiers that you might have or the different products that you might have. But then on the x axis, there's the different packages you have, right? So what features are in which tiers or which features are in different packages that you're selling, right? And if you can figure out how to measure those two things in a pretty efficient manner, then all of a sudden you can start to solve maybe not 100% of the pricing problem, but you don't necessarily need 100% of the pricing problem because you're starting from zero. But you can solve a lot of it, right? And kind of get things out there without having to guess and check your way to success. So the long story short, and answer to your question is basically what we did is we collected data, or we built an algorithm or a couple of algorithms to collect data from target customers that basically would point out, hey, this is how much this is worth, and this is what I care about in terms of features. And with some basic kind of segmentation and filtering of that data, you can get a fairly clear answer, at least a directional answer as to, hey, this is what you should be priced at, and these are the features that people care about.
Okay, awesome. So how did you go about taking this idea to your first customers, and what did that look like for them?
Frankly, and when I say we, I mean, really it was me, because it was just like I had a couple of part-time co-founders that were, somewhat helpful, here and there, but it was one of those things where I was kind of working 18 hours a day trying to figure out what in God's name to do. And really, frankly, it came down to getting paid to do our customer development. So I think this is a big lesson that I learned, which was, like some people, they want to build this really fancy product, then they want to put it out there and get this really, really high price. The only people who are typically really successful with that are those who have been through the rodeo before, have the connections, and have a good amount of funding. I had zero funding. I had, basically my credit card balance to basically fund the business. And on top of that, what I was doing was basically living in a world where there was this problem that was easy to articulate. Hey, you didn't do anything to basically help with your pricing. Like people got that because they didn't do anything and they knew it was a problem. And so what I did is, again, started doing some content, just writing blog posts that were just really straightforward. Like, hey, this is what's going on. This is a problem, that type of stuff. And it started resonating with people. And all of a sudden got, that first customer who was like, yeah, I could use some data, and didn't do anything crazy and didn't oversell it too much. I probably oversold it too much, but not crazy amounts, if that makes sense. And then got them some data, and they were able to make a decision based on the data. And I charged them like a ridiculously small amount of money. And then all of a sudden that customer led to a testimonial, and then that led to the next customer, and, so on and so forth. And so it was one of those things where, through kind of just the grind, if you will, it's kind of a cliche thing to say these days, but through that grind, I was able to build that first initial base. And the product probably wasn't as great as it could have been or should have been, but it's one of those things where we were kind of funding the business through, learning essentially.
Okay. So you said you started creating content. So I'm guessing you didn't have a well-known blog at the time. Did you just start pushing this out through your social channels like LinkedIn and Facebook, or how did you get this potential customer who became your customer like interested or to see that content?
Yeah, so I think there were two big things actually in the early days, and they're not big now, like meaning like if we did them now, it wouldn't work that well. And even then, to most companies, they'd be like, oh, that seems such a small opportunity. The one thing that happened that worked out really well, so I had known a local tech reporter, a guy by the name of Scott Kirsner, who was the Boston Globe tech reporter. And I had interacted with him a couple of times at the former company that I was at. And on top of that, I just like known him and I just kind of pitched him a story. I said, hey, do you want to catch up? And I said, hey, I'm starting this new thing and this is what's going on. And he did a write-up about us, and that led to some good leads because it wasn't as high volume, if that makes sense, but it was just very high quality because he's a Boston Globe tech reporter, right?
Mhm.
And then the other thing that really worked out is I would take a blog post that I would write because we had no audience. I think we had like 50 to 100 contacts in our database. And what I would do is I would send that out to all of the people who were already on the list, and then I would share in LinkedIn groups. And this is back when LinkedIn groups, you could kind of get good traffic from them because LinkedIn hadn't shut down some of the sharing mechanisms. And so I would join 50 LinkedIn groups. I would share it with all 50 LinkedIn groups individually, and that would drive some good traffic because the content, it was good. Like, it wasn't God's gift to content, but it was definitely not bad content. It was like really straightforward content. And then little by little, I would have people download an ebook that was written by one of my part-time co-founders. And then basically that just kind of let the ball roll, if you will. And yeah, it was just the grind. Not to be cliche again, but that's really what it was. There was no like magic hack. Every magic hack we've looked for has just not worked for better and for worse.
I think those are two pretty good tactical things. And even the LinkedIn groups, I don't know how effective those are anymore. I haven't used them personally, but even doing some outreach promotion for our own content, Facebook group still works really well if you have a great piece of content doing basically the same strategy you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay. So can you give a little bit more detail? Like this first client, they decide that they want to fix some of their pricing. So what are some of the, maybe the survey questions you're going and sending out? Is it to their customers? Are you doing it to other people? Like, what does that look like if someone wants to improve their pricing and they're listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I think the first big thing is a lot of times there's no data at all for your pricing decision. It doesn't really matter if you're a startup, a Fortune 500 company, a software company, someone selling teddy bears online. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. You should get some data. And I'm not saying you need thousands of data points and all types of different things, but I am saying that you need to have something that basically takes care of mitigating some of the risk involved with the pricing decision. And that's like a big thing because a lot of people, they're very scared to go talk to people about their price, scared to go talk to people about their value. But you have to realize that like everyone understands that things cost money. And so you have to get out of the room, and similar to talking to people about, what their problems are with certain products or what their problems are with certain things in their business or in their lives, you have to talk to them about value. And there's ways you can do that. And we publish a lot of those things, but the best thing to do is just talking to people and asking them very traditional, like non-leading questions like, hey, at what price is this way too expensive that you'd never consider purchasing it? At what price is this a really good deal that you would purchase it right away? Even with those two questions across 10 people, I can start to put into frame like where the value is that people are currently seeing my product. And if I ask enough people, and I ask people of different groups, prospects, current customers, people who have churned or weren't happy, all of a sudden I can start to see where I am in like this value world, if you will. Beyond that, I think, and that's the big thing, and a lot of people aren't going to do that because that requires work, but honest to God, that's the biggest secret, is just talk to your customers, for better or for worse. But I think some other like tactical things that you can do. The first one is if you're selling something that isn't a physical good, and even if you're selling a physical good, getting what's called your value metric correct. So a value metric is how you charge. So in a software sense, it's per user, per 100 visits, per 1,000 widgets or whatsits or whatever your product is. But even for like a retail product, it might be per item or per 1,000 items or per 100 items or however you want to structure. And the reason that this is so important is, especially when you're in kind of a subscription business, if you get your value metric correct, what ends up happening is you basically align yourself to that customer and how they want to see and pay for your product, but also in where and the amount they see the value in. So if I keep purchasing your product that has this value metric, when I want to purchase more of that product, I'm more than happy to pay for it. And if I don't want to purchase as much, I'm still more than happy to pay for it. It's just I'm not going to pay you as much and I'm not going to get as much. But those are two of the biggest things, and they're a little bit hard to kind of convey on a podcast, but those are typically the biggest things that I recommend looking at, especially if you're in kind of the subscription world, but even if you're not in the subscription world as well.
Okay, awesome. So Patrick, if I have this right, you're basically taking a couple of these strategies, trying to figure out how much should their product be worth? And then what are some of the features that should come with it? And then maybe, like you said, the value metric, like how they should be charging per user, per visitor, that kind of thing. So When someone hires you, are you giving those strategies? You're going out and talking to the customers for them and then helping deliver like, here's a report of what we think you should do next?
Yeah, so our product, it's much deeper than some of the things I've been talking about. So we have some software that basically goes out and collects this data, and then we're able to slice this data and position this data depending on the problem we're trying to solve. So in the value metric case, basically we can collect data to be very clear on, hey, for this type of customer, this is the value metric and what it should be. For this type of customer, this is what the value metric should be, and so on and so forth. And then there's price localization, there's packaging, there's positioning, there's all types of different things. So basically we're in the business on the price intelligently side of our business and basically using our algorithms to collect this data and then give insight into, hey, this is what your price should be, this is what your package should be, this is what your value metric should be, et cetera.
Okay, awesome. So when you guys were starting out Price Intelligently, were you doing all of those things or was it narrowed in on maybe one solution?
Honestly, in the beginning, it was kind of all over the place. So we were kind of like, okay, hey, what's your pricing problem? And they would be like, well, we want to launch this new feature and we're not sure if it should be an add-on, if it should be included, or if it should be in this tier and raise this price. Or some folks would come to us and say, hey, our complete pricing is all messed up. We need help with all of our pricing. And so it was kind of like kitchen sinking of the problem, because in the early days, we knew pricing was more than just the number on the page, meaning it's more than just charging $100. It's all about the packaging and the value metrics and the localization and all this other stuff. But we kind of didn't know how to structure our own packaging to basically our own product to actually solve that problem. And so we would run into these situations where people would be like, okay, you're getting us all this data. Now we don't know what to do with the data because there's just so much of this data. And so we would have to break things down to make it a lot cleaner and a lot more digestible for our customers, if that makes sense. And so now what'll happen is someone will come to us and say like, hey, I have this problem. And then we'll ask them a bunch of questions and we'll be like, okay, you actually have these 6 problems in this order in terms of priority, meaning, you got to solve this one because that's going to have the highest impact. And then these ones have smaller impacts, but there's still problems to be solved. And then what ends up happening is we basically structure our engagements basically as a subscription in and of itself. So we charge an annual subscription, and then basically we become a part of their team and basically help them and be their pricing expert, collecting this data every 6 to 8 weeks for different problems that they have. And it goes beyond pricing as well. It goes even into things like, what's going on with your product road mapping, right? Because you want to be able to build products that are actually boosting value and features that are boosting value. And most of the time, we're not really measuring that value as much as we probably should be.
Okay, awesome. So I have in my notes that you guys got to about $130,000 in contracts in your first 6 months. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think it was like 126, but it's definitely really close to 130. Yeah, right there.
Okay, perfect. So how did you go from the first couple of clients that you got through these 2 content strategies? You got some testimonials. Were the rest of those contracts through referrals and word of mouth, or did you guys have any strategies to grow that business?
In hindsight, I could probably make up like a really good story about like, hey, we knew we had to focus on these 3 things and all that kind of stuff. And I think we did intuitively know that, but really it came down to, so that first 6 months, it was just me. And then this was like the end of a year. It was like June to December. And then I was like, I need to hire, right? I need someone else. And so I brought on a guy by the name of Peter Zotto, who's our GM at this point of the Price Intelligently team. And basically what he ended up doing was taking over just all sales. So what happened is I was basically doing all of the implementation and all the kind of service element with our software and doing all the content and then kind of like all the CEO things. And then he would do all the sales and started building kind of the sales team. And that included some outbound, it included the inbound leads. And then it was just like anything and everything that we could get our hands on, right? And to scale, it was kind of interesting is we didn't have a marketing team actually until this past year, 2018. And so we went 5 years without really any marketing help. It was just like publishing content. And I think that what was kind of cool about that is we just were like, all right, what's the goal? Can we brute forced our way to those goals every single quarter in order to basically get to a point where, we could keep scaling the business? And yeah, I think that it was just kind of all hands on deck and doing what we can. And when we failed or we faltered a little bit, we would correct. And it just was people being really, really committed to the mission, which I think was really the key element to our success.
Awesome. All right. Well, Patrick, I'd love to talk a little bit about like one thing I think when people start businesses is they don't do sales well. So it's interesting that you outsource this. How did you find the right person that could do it and actually get that off the ground. Because I think it would have been very easy where you outsourced it and didn't work, and then you probably got frustrated and probably would have shifted trajectories.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was more just like, we always wanted to build like a big business, right? Like I didn't want to just be like a contractor or like we're always going to be a vendor, but I didn't just want to be like a lifestyle business. And so I think that helped understand like a lot of those decisions, because it was like, well, I'm going to need someone to do this at some point, right? And it was just kind of appraising like, what was the thing that I could give up that someone else could do better than me, or at least good enough, but still took up more time, right? And that was definitely in the sales aspect, because on the pricing aspect, like I kind of alluded to before, we were still trying to figure out what our own packaging and our own product suite looked like. And that was something that I was so much closer to that problem than anyone else was. And I could have brought in a product person, but I think the problem would have been is like their ramp time would have been like a year, because it was all in my head at that point, and we were kind of going forward with what we needed to go forward with.
Okay. So did you already have like some systems in place with following up with inbound and creating outbound leads that you were able to hand to him?
Yeah, so we had good inbound flow. I mean, that was coming from content. And that's the one thing that we just kept doing was just our content. So like the content would produce some leads, we would get referrals, all that kind of fun stuff. That would all basically go into a hopper, which was just a Peter. And then we started building out kind of the traditional like BDR to AE structure, where we'd have people basically responsible for creating opportunities, and we had people responsible for closing. And up until like a couple years, I mean, for the first 3-4 years, I mean, that was all Peter closing. Not like everything, but he was definitely helping on every single deal. And so now we got to a point where it was just like, Peter, we're not going to scale unless you get the hell out of there and like basically let the AEs fail or succeed. And so now we're in a good place where he's doing his thing and, you know, really successful at it.
Okay, awesome. So you guys developed a sales strategy. Can we talk a little bit about like your inbound content strategy, how you did that? I know you waited, several years before creating a marketing team, but it sounded like you were doing that pretty well yourself.
Yeah, I think we had a unique situation, right? Because we were in a market, in the pricing market, which no one knows anything about pricing. Or if they do, it's very like cursive. It's like tribal knowledge. It's like, hey, oh, well, I heard that if you put your most expensive tier on the left, that's better for your pricing. It's like, that's not pricing, that's tactics, right? That's not actually strategic core value, right? And so we were beneficial to be in that position, because whenever we published something that was insightful, it went not viral, but like viral for a SaaS pricing company, getting 1,000 views on a blog post, like that was a lot for the pricing, right? And so we've had a high enough value product then that all of a sudden we could basically, push those inbound efforts forward. Now, we didn't really have a deep strategy, and we still are just getting to the point where we're having a much deeper strategy on how we do content. And this past like 6 months has really developed what that strategy is going to look like. But basically what we ended up doing is we always had an offer. It was a very traditional inbound product where all of a sudden you read a blog post, you had an offer, you downloaded that offer, we had a drip campaign, and then some people would raise their hands and some people wouldn't. And other times we would do webinars, but there wasn't a master plan. The master plan was basically do really good content and then just publish that to everyone and then see what happens. And it's definitely not great. It's not going to scale. And we've been fixing it in the past 6 to 9 months and kind of going into 2019. But that was kind of our inbound efforts. And even if you look at like a lot of our pages right now, there's plenty of blog posts that don't have meta descriptions and things like that. Like it's really bad. So we're going back and we're like fixing a lot of that stuff, because we weren't even really focused on like, hey, how do we improve our SEO? It wasn't like a thing that we were thinking about.
You guys weren't going out and finding like keywords with search volume. You guys were just writing content that you thought would be interesting or useful.
Yeah, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but yeah, that's what we were. That's what we've done, right? And like we're still doing that right now. We're still not really focused on where we should be. Like we're hiring SEO folks right now, basically to kind of help solve this, because we're producing, at least in our opinion, and objectively, I would argue, some really, really good content with video, written, all that kind of stuff. And so it's one of those things where we're sitting here and we're like, well, we're getting a lot out of the post, but we should increase that value even further than where it is now. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's super tough. It's just one of those things where, like, again, being scrappy and being comfortable with, hey, in 6 months from now, we're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that. oh my God, like that's the story of this whole business has been like 9 months from now. I'm gonna be like, oh my God, I can't believe we were still doing that at that point. We should have done this earlier, but that's just kind of the nature of the game is as you grow, you got to be really comfortable with basically failing constantly.
Sure. Okay. So you basically take this strategy of like this SEO content strategy. You guys generate leads from that content, and then your sales team would follow up and close them. Is that how you guys got to over $1 million, or is there some other strategies that had to come in place?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty straightforward, right? It was just grinding, getting the leads, converting the leads, kind of going from there. The advantage that we had is we're not selling a $50 product. We're selling something that is typically six figures, or at that point was like mid five figures. And so it was one of those things where, we were closing 8 deals a quarter, then we were closing 10 deals consistently. Now we're closing, 15 to 20 deals and like so on and so forth. And so that was kind of the big grind of things. And then adding, additional products when ProfitWell came along and things like that. And so, yeah, I think it was just grinding it out. And I think that getting to 1 million takes work, but it's not difficult if you are willing to give up some constraints. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people are like, oh, I want to get up to $1 million, but I only want to work 20 hours a week. I don't want to do heavy sales. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. And that's totally fine to be like, these are my constraints because of my lifestyle or whatever it ends up being. But I think for us, it was more like, we need to get there because we're trying to get to 10 and then we're trying to get to 100 and so on and so forth. And so all of a sudden it was like, cool. Like I paid myself $0 for the first 9 months, basically lived on my cashed in my like very small 401k because I wasn't old. I didn't have like a big 401k and, I took a tax hit. And then I paid myself like $36,000 a year, which is basically well below the poverty line here in Boston. I did that for a while. And it was just because of these constraints, because I was like, oh, there's this bigger mission. There's the bigger vision of what we're trying to do. And so, yeah, I think it's just one of those things where like that, if I had to do it over again, like, I don't know if I would do it a completely different way. I probably would do it smarter and a lot more efficiently, but it was one of those things where it wasn't hard. It just took a lot of work.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good share. We'll get back to the show in a minute, but first a quick thanks to our sponsor, Lead Quizzes. If you want to grow your business to 7 figures and beyond, you must learn how to generate leads predictably. When I first started my business, lead generation felt like riding a roller coaster. I would have huge sales months and then months with nothing. This happened because I relied solely on referrals and networking to grow my business. Predicting growth and investing in the future were frightening because I didn't have control over my lead generation. That was before we created Lead Quizzes. Now I predictably generate leads in my sleep and have stopped worrying about where the next sale will come from. Top marketers like Neil Patel and Lewis Howes have used Lead Quizzes to increase their lead capture by up to 500%. Think about it. Quizzes are fun, engaging, and you can offer personalized feedback in exchange for your quiz taker's contact information. Lead Quizzes is a software that allows you to set up high-converting quizzes quickly without having to hire an expensive programmer. In fact, our users have generated over 3 million leads for their businesses. Take control of your lead generation today and start your 14-day free trial by going to leadquizzes.com/podcast. Patrick, I'd like to shift into next. So at what point did you guys consider developing this tool, ProfitWell? And can you explain to our users what that tool is?
Yeah, totally. So it's free subscription financial metrics and now engagement metrics as well. So you can plug in your billing system, Stripe, Zora, Braintree, whatever you're using. And basically, once you plug that in, you get free access to your MRR, your churn, all those kind of fun numbers. And even things like active usage and stuff like that. And so that came out of basically, we were looking for something that was a little bit more pure software. So right now with Price Intelligently, we tried to sell the software by itself. That had a bunch of problems that I didn't go too deep into. Basically, we just got into a situation that like people, they love the data, but then they didn't have the confidence to use the data because they just had never done anything with pricing before. So they asked us to help them. And so that's what kind of morphed it into this tech-enabled service. So you can't buy us without our software. Like we're not going to be a consultant for you, but you also can't buy the software without us. That's kind of the model for Price Intelligently. And so we were like, all right, what would help us make this even easier for us and our customers? Well, it's getting access to certain types of data. And while this was going on, we were also thinking about like, how do we kind of proliferate a product across the subscription economy to basically not only get the data, but also provide more value and give us the ability to build our business even further. Because one thing that a lot of people don't know is that there's not a lot of subscription companies out there. There's less than 100,000 subscription companies. That includes media and SaaS and all these other places. And so for us to build a big business, we can't build a big business and sell something for $50 a month. We have to have multiple different products or something that's very large across a large swath of people, which is pretty rare to find within a market. And so that mixed with, we had a moment where we were helping a company that was about to IPO with their pricing. And we discovered that they were calculating their MRR, their monthly recurring revenue, completely incorrectly. And for those of you who don't know, your MRR is like looking in your bank account, reading the number and still getting it wrong. Like it's a number that just should be so obvious for your business. And so long story short, all of these things kind of converging, we were like, okay, cool. Like this is what we should start, is a subscription financial metrics product. And we thought, oh, let's do it on the back of Stripe, because Stripe was, already a pretty hot company, but they were just starting to get even hotter. And it was one of those things where like, we thought we were geniuses. We thought this is the product that everyone was going to buy. Like, why would they buy all these other analytics products? And little did we know that within a 6-month time span, I think like 8 weeks before we launched, or 4 to 8 weeks, I'm not sure. It definitely was before we launched, but before we got to launched officially, like Barometrics launched, which is a paid subscription financial metrics product. And then like 6 weeks after we launched, a company called ChartMogul. So all of a sudden in this like 6-month period, all these products have launched to do kind of the same thing. And so this was one of those things where we were like, oh shit, we still have this grander mission for this product, but now there's all this competition. Like, do we kill this product? Do we try to find something else? Like, what do we do? And eventually we determined, after doing a lot of pricing research and realizing that it's a really, really hard product to sell, as our competitors have found out. But basically we realized, hey, like there's a lot of value in us giving this away for free. And so that's kind of the path that we chose, essentially. And there's a bunch of fun details to get into there, but just wanted to give as much of the backstory as I could.
Yeah, I agree. So that was like, it's a very difficult space. Like even some of the companies that you mentioned, like getting accurate data is extremely difficult. And I know having our own software company, like you go to an accountant or something like that, and they don't really understand how to read these subscription-based numbers to you. So like, I think a lot of subscription companies are relying on software, like you mentioned. So I'm curious, just the strategy. So you guys took this like almost building software as a piece of content to draw in a lot of visitors and a lot of leads. Like guys like Neil Patel talk about this a lot. Would you be willing to share some of the information around like maybe how long it took you to develop it, or what some of those costs were? And then we can talk about how you've made this like a successful strategy for you guys.
Yeah, man. So there was, in hindsight, like we'll have to do the full P&L on this at some point, because
you almost don't want to know how much it costs, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so first it started off where we were like, so at this point in time, we have 0 people who are engineers on the team. Software engineers. And so this is like me, Peter, maybe we were like 6 to 8 people, right? Including interns. It was probably a little bit less than that. And so we're sitting there. And actually, I remember there were just some people, I don't know if you've talked about this before, and I'm sure you've experienced it, where like your company gets to a certain level and you're like, there's this group of people who just aren't going to go to the next level. And there's this group of people who, can't be stopped, right? They're just going to keep going. Mm-hmm. So we had a moment like that where we basically let a good number of people go. And then it was down to like 3 of us, just because it was like, I think we were at like 5 and we let 2 people go. And it was me, Peter, and then at that time, a marketing intern, Eric, who's now one of our senior engineers. He's just been phenomenal over the past 6 years. It was amazing. But anyway, so it was just the 3 of us. And then we were like, we had this mission and we were rebuilding and hiring and all this other fun stuff. And then all of a sudden we had this vision of ProfitWell. And so we needed someone from engineering. And so it was really kind of funny is one of our first customers was like, oh, there's this guy I know. His name's Facundo. I worked with him at Compete, which was a big analytics company. You guys should talk because I know you're looking for like a head of product. And so I met Facundo, and Facundo, we could do a whole podcast on the relationship between me and Facundo. Facundo is a Argentinian, 1% body fat, works out every day, socialist, liberal, and I am pretty much the opposite of all of those things. And so it was one of those things where we started hanging out. And he started off as a contractor. And so that was $120 an hour, I think. He was giving us a deal. And he's a legit engineer. Like he was a principal engineer at Compete and a couple of other places. And he was a founder at a couple of other places. So he was like legit and he was giving us a deal. And then all of a sudden, like 8 to 9 months into that, he was like, oh, I want to come on board. And so he became my CPO. He's on our board, all that kind of fun stuff. And so it was just Facundo for a while. Then the marketing intern, Eric, he was like, I want to come back for another co-op, but I want to do it as an engineering intern. So we brought him on. And then the ball just kind of started rolling. So I think that was maybe like a year-ish. And then we had 2 years of like basically just focusing on building the product without charging anything. And so I'm trying to get to a cost estimate. I have no idea what these numbers actually are, but I'm thinking like, we had 3-4 engineers basically working on it for a year, and then probably around 6 engineers working on it for that second year. And we weren't charging anything. And the reason we weren't is because, one, we discovered how difficult, and I already alluded to this, it would be to charge for this type of product.
Mm-hmm.
We collected a bunch of data that basically was like, hey, there's no way that people are going to pay enough to basically overcome the churn. And this is natural for analytics and BI products, because you log in like once or twice a month and then you're like, oh, this isn't worth what I'm paying. And in reality, they put a shit ton of work into giving you those graphs, but you just don't appreciate them, right? And so it was one of those things where we realized that. And the other thing we realized is accuracy is actually really, really difficult. So our competitors were basically doing their calculations based on invoices. And this is probably not relevant to a lot of people, but the problem with invoices is you don't know what's going to happen for 30 days until you get the next invoice. So we had to start, and I think they've all kind of followed us here, where you have to actually calculate your metrics based on events. And anyone who knows Stripe, that'll make sense to them. Anyone who doesn't, just know that basically it was a more granular data point. And so that took a long time. And we basically decided we weren't going to build out more features until we had solved the accuracy thing. And that took at least a year of those 2.5 years. And so, yeah, long story short, we definitely were like, hey, this is the future. And this is, what we have to do. And maybe if we saw what the numbers actually were going to be, we wouldn't have done it. But I think it's worked out, thankfully, well so far.
Interesting. So you guys did this all bootstrap. So Price Intelligently, really, I'm assuming was funding this. So did you guys use like some of the users that would join up on ProfitWell? They put their numbers in there. Did you guys start to use that as like an ability to like go and like find the best people that would work for you guys and then do outreach to them?
Yeah, I think for us, for a couple of reasons, we took all the profit from Price Intelligently, and basically we were hiring engineers to build ProfitWell at that point. So we didn't treat them as separate companies, but we did kind of separate them off because we couldn't sacrifice Price Intelligently at all, because that's what was paying the bills. And so we needed to put ourselves in a position where we didn't affect each of them. So it's a separate website, ProfitWell.com versus PriceIntelligently.com. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were like, oh, is this a separate company? Is this a separate product? And we still get those questions because we're still working on unifying our brand. And so the long story short of that, to answer your question, is basically we didn't do any of that. We didn't do any qualifying with ProfitWell for a long time. We're still not doing it for Price Intelligently because we're trying to protect the experience of the ProfitWell community. So what that means is like, yes, you'll probably receive one email a quarter that's like, hey, you have a problem that we can solve. Do you want our help? And we feel like that's okay because we're giving a free product, and like at the minimum, one email a quarter probably isn't too intrusive. And so we want to find more articulate ways to basically get those people who are on ProfitWell to pay us money. And what we've done is like there's some landing pages inside the app where it's like, hey, if you go to that landing page, it'll tell you like, hey, right now you're losing this much money. We can make you this much money using this product. And this is retained, for instance. Just sign up here, do X, Y, Z. And that's something that's a little bit subtler way to do it. We're coming out with some like audits and graders that you can use. But yeah, we're getting better at using those inbound leads, quote unquote, but we're not too obtrusive yet. And we're not going to become obtrusive, but we're going to become a lot more clever on how to make stuff happen.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, like content marketing strategy, just get more people, but you're also collecting data on them. So like, for instance, we signed up for your retain product where your software is connected with Stripe and it says that, you're losing this many people because of churn. Here's a product that can try and like save those people. And then you guys make some money off of that. And it's a really intuitive thing, but also like, I think it also makes the customer feel better that they know what's in it for you and they know how like you can make money versus thinking that you're doing something else with their data that that aren't aware of. So I think that's a really interesting strategy, and it's awesome even as a customer.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a very careful situation that we have to be in, right? Because we don't go into your account or anything like that unless you ask us to. And we want to be very careful on like algorithmically telling you there's a problem. And we want to do that beyond just, hey, you can pay us to solve this. We're coming out with something using a bunch of fun machine learning and all kinds of fun stuff to basically help you identify like, hey, this is a problem, or this is good, or this is bad. We want to do that more and more algorithmically so that you can trust us and know that we're respecting your privacy, but we're also helping you beyond just giving you a bunch of pretty graphs. And so it's something that we're cranking on and moving forward with.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Patrick, I think this has been a pretty interesting interview. Would love to ask you some like quick fire questions at the end here. Was there a time that you felt that your business was going to fail?
It depends on how you define failure. I know it's supposed to be quick fire, but I think, yeah, I mean, I had cancer a couple of years into the business. I didn't think we were going to fail, but I thought that it wasn't terribly bad, for me in terms of like, it wasn't on death's door or anything like that. But there was a couple of thoughts that crossed my mind that like, well, I'm not going to be involved as much anymore. And then I think that we've had a couple of scares in terms of like, really aggravated customers where it was our fault, or really aggravated customers where it was their fault. No matter whose fault it is, it always feels like, oh my God, this is going to be the end of the business because you're so sensitive to what's going on with your business. And so, yeah, I think there's plenty of times where that feeling has existed.
Okay. Patrick, what's the one thing that you did that had the biggest impact on your growth?
Oof. I mean, it's got to be content. Yeah, that's got to be the biggest thing. I mean, content has helped us so much just from a trust factor as well as from just acquisition factor.
Is there a book that's had like a big impact on your career with Price Intelligently and ProfitWell?
I mean, High Output Management by Andy Grove. I mean, it's not great for the early stage, but it gets you ready for like 15 to 20 employees on up. And all of a sudden you start thinking about the machine in a good way. I mean, machine in the best interpretation of the word.
Okay. And if you could go back in time and start over, what would you tell yourself?
That was so hard, right? Because you're supposed to have no regrets. I think working on the most charitable interpretation principle much earlier. So the most charitable interpretation, for those of you who don't know, is basically like, you could say like, F you to be on this call right now, right? And the most aggressive interpretation or the most negative interpretation is you being, a jerk and being an a-hole to me and attacking me, right? But the most charitable interpretation might be, oh, you're just joking around and I don't know you that well and that's just your personality and you don't mean anything by it, right? And I think that when you're in a business that's moving quickly and doesn't have a lot of resources, which is every business, even if you're funded, I think you tend to, and even just in life, you tend to take the most negative or closer to a negative interpretation of things because you're sensitive, you're taking things personally, and you want to always be right. But I think what's really helped me is at least in the latter half of these 6 years, is the most charitable interpretation where when something happens or when someone says something, it still might bother me in that quick half second, but then sitting there and being like, okay, they're upset or they're angry or there's something because of a good reason. It's not because of a bad reason. They're not trying to be a butthead to me or something like that. They have something's wrong. And so let's first understand what's going on and not, get offended by their words. Let's just figure it out. And I mean, once I started flexing that, I'm not 100% on that at all. That's really changed my life just in terms of management and coaching and things like that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Patrick, just to wrap things up, where can people learn more about ProfitWell and go and read your content? We'll get that linked up in the show notes and connect with you.
Yeah, I think just go check out ProfitWell.com. That's where everything is kind of trending, in terms of our content and things like that. And I think on top of that, connect with me at Patrick C. Campbell on LinkedIn or Patticus, Patticus on Twitter. And my email address, if you want that too, is pc@profitwell.com. I normally get back to everyone and sometimes take some time, but if you have any pricing questions or anything like that, I'm always up to help.
Awesome, Patrick. Well, thanks for coming on the show and sharing your journey to 7 figures.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening to our show this week. If you want to find out more or hear previous episodes, you can go to blog.leadquizzes.com. If you'd like to start generating more leads for your business and get a 14-day free trial to Lead Quizzes, go to leadquizzes.com/podcast. Please also subscribe to our show on Apple or however you get your podcasts. You can also write us at support@leadquizzes.com. I'm Jeremy Ellens, and you've been listening to Journey to 7 Figures.